Donuts and coffee and getting some energy food in you this morning. No, it's good to be together. Always exciting to have a 60-degree start to the day in July. And that's almost exactly what the Myers enjoy in Sebring on a regular basis. Not so much. I remember when we were down there a couple years ago, it was far from 60s and pleasant. It was hot and humid and hot and humid. But no, the Lord brought a reprieve in the weather for them while they're here in the Midwest, so that's exciting. It's good to be together today. We've asked the Myers to share with us a ministry update during this hour this morning. 2 summers back, Emily and Joel and Nathan all were able to come down with Nathan and Marcy and I and spend some time working at EBI alongside the Myers. And so it's always exciting to be able to see firsthand where our global partners are located and to see their ministry firsthand. And even to this day, I will hear the guys say stuff about our time down with you and memories of you folks and of Daryl in the print shop and all sorts of things there with the different missionaries we were able to connect with while we were in Florida. So we're excited to have them here. Last year they were supposed to be with us this time, and he decided to get sick instead and drove home sick to Florida. We're glad that they're healthy this time around and able to spend the morning with us today. And so let's commit the day to the Lord, and then we'll have Richard come and share with us. God, we thank you and praise you for the greatness of who you are. God, we come together not because of us, but we come together because of you. And as we behold our God and we think about your majesty, your sovereignty, your supremacy, God, we're reminded of the great privilege it is to even be called your children, much less to be used by you in service. And so, God, today I pray that we'd be challenged by ministry opportunities around the globe, and specifically through how you're using the Myers in effective service for you in literature, publication, and distribution to Hispanic-speaking churches. And so, God, I pray that you'd encourage us from our time spent together with this ministry update and then time spent together in the Word today as well. In Jesus' name. Brother, come and share with us this morning. It's so great to have you here.
Glad to be here today. And as Pastor said, we were going to be here last year, but it just didn't. I didn't think you folks wanted me to share what my grandkids, even this year, referred to as the plague. It really wasn't, but I sure wasn't feeling very good. But we are working at Editorial Bautista Independiente, which means Independent Baptist Publisher. And usually we would just shorten it and refer to the initials and say EBI or EB. And that is the Spanish Literature Ministry of Baptist Missions in Sebring, Florida. When we travel, almost all of our supporting churches are up in this part of the country. And it works out so that we can also visit our children at the same time. And we started out this trip almost about 3.5 weeks ago, going to the Baptist Missions Conference in Ohio, in Elyria. And then we went up to the Detroit area where our oldest son, Ryan, is living. And he graduated from Detroit Baptist Seminary last year, and now he's studying for his PhD. He wants to be a college seminary professor. And so we had the weekend with them and his family. Then we went to Iowa, spent a week at Sheila's dad's house, and then at our daughter's house. And during that time, we spoke at 3 churches in Iowa. Yesterday morning we came to Omaha, spent the afternoon and evening with my uncle and aunt. Drove down here today. This afternoon we drive to Edmond, Oklahoma, spend a couple days with our youngest son, and then back to Florida and try to get caught up with all of the things that have been happening while we're gone. But what I want to do this morning in Sunday school is show you 2 videos. I'll show you one, which is a general video that shows what the EBI wants to accomplish and what needs to be accomplished. And I'll tell a little bit about the work. And then there will be another video that with ideas and suggestions for things that we need to do in the future, specifically getting some replacements for some of us older people down there at EBI. And hopefully, I don't see a clock here handy. I'll look at my watch. Hopefully there'll be a few minutes there at the end that we can let you ask questions. So if you think of anything, jot it down in your mind, and we'll talk about it at the end. Let's have the first video now.
One, then another, then another. The pattern has repeated itself over hundreds of thousands of times through the past 50+ years. The gospel of Christ has powerfully been preached in Central and South America so that today there are between 40 and 50 million believers. Presently, there are over 9,000 Baptist congregations in the region. Many of these are found in urban areas. Lima, Peru, and Monterrey, Mexico, for example, are both projected in the near future to have more than 1,000 churches each. While reaching souls is certainly a point for celebration, there is also an alarming trend that threatens the health and the continued growth of the Spanish church: a lack of doctrinally sound printed materials for pastors and ministries.
Una iglesia local necesita de varones, y varones que están creciendo en la palabra de Dios. Si los varones no crecen en la palabra de Dios, la iglesia va a ser débil.
In North America, quality resources on doctrine, Christian living, and ministries of the local church are readily available. However, this is not so in Latin America, and those resources that do exist are often written from a context that does not fit their culture. Even worse, they often communicate inaccurate teaching on the Holy Spirit that could lead misinformed church leaders down the wrong path. Editorial Bautista Independiente, the Spanish literature ministry of Baptist Mid-Missions, is strategically placed to accept this challenge by leveraging the experience of veteran missionaries and national pastors with modern technology and delivery methods. The result is an innovative ministry that blends literature development with Spanish culture, modern printing methods, and an efficient distribution system, so that doctrinally sound, quality materials are available to Hispanic pastors and church leaders.
Bueno, una cosa que nos ayuda del material de la EBI es la aplicación para el pueblo latinoamericano, ¿no? Para las necesidades de nosotros. Tenemos diferentes necesidades por pertenecer a diferentes culturas, ¿ya? Y gracias a Dios por eso.
Wow, era muy lindo el material, muy lindo. Me explicaron ahí, ¿verdad? Y yo lo entendí y eso plasmé a los niños.
It is our passion. It is our mission to encourage servant leaders to learn, to direct, and to teach their congregations confidently, not swayed by every wind of false doctrine. The Great Commission is about more than evangelism. It requires discipleship, the making of disciples so that they can grow in their faith and in their service.
Our strategy involves partnerships on multiple levels. First of all, we are seeking individuals from a variety of professional disciplines who will commit to serving as vocational missionaries here in our ministry office, located in Sebring, Florida, and throughout Latin America.
It's exciting to be able to work on the mission field while I'm actually creating and developing material. The advantage is that I get to see how it works there on the field and get feedback before we actually roll it out to the general population. So we'll know how it actually is received and how effective it is.
Es muy interesante y también a la vez muy completo. Me gusta sobre todo el contenido que tiene y la sana doctrina que también creo que es lo básico para una iglesia, la iglesia de Cristo.
Beyond going, we also need individuals and local churches who will partner with us through prayer and financial support to meet the growing needs of the EBI ministry and the national church. One opportunity involves the donation of funds toward the purchase of a pastor's library for needy Hispanic pastors.
Gracias, Evi, porque a través de ustedes Dios ha podido hacer realidad nuestras peticiones.
Gracias, Evi.
Que el Señor lo bendiga, Evi. Gracias.
Gracias, Evi.
Finally, while we realize that not everyone can work as missionaries, we need volunteers who are interested in leveraging their talents to aid in short-term projects that arise throughout the year. You may have web design, graphics, page layout, or marketing skills. Perhaps you are fluent in Spanish and could serve through translation or document editing. Or you may be able to donate time to help with the assembly of materials at the office in Sebring. We're focused on strategically placing ourselves in a new and innovative era of missions, and we want you to participate with us. Visit us at ebi-bmm.org to learn more.
A couple things I want to say right off the bat is EBI's ministry is with Spanish literature. But I want you to remember that all your missionaries that are speaking other languages, they have the same needs, if not worse, than what we have in Spanish, as far as the availability of good Christian literature. And the other thing I want to point out, it talks about how there's about 9,000 churches in Latin America. And Lima, Peru, and Monterrey, Mexico, which is up in northern Mexico, have close to 1,000 churches in each of those areas. Well, churches in Latin America tend to be a little bit smaller. Both of those cities are cities of several million people. But you need to remember, a lot of the people don't have cars, and public transportation is rather iffy sometimes. So the churches tend to be smaller and more neighborhood churches where people can walk to easily. I don't know, but I bet there are some of the folks here from the church that they come 20, 30 miles or maybe more. Well, here in the States, that's not a big deal. But it's much more difficult overseas. And so that's one of the reasons why, even though there's that many churches in Latin America, there are still a lot of areas that need churches and need missionaries to start these churches. But as you look at Latin America, you'll see that as these churches have been started, if they've been discipled properly and the people are growing spiritually, they in turn will turn around and start other churches. And that's where the vast majority of those 9,000 have actually come from. They're second and third generation churches. And that's ultimately what we want to do, because the nationals can do a better job than any foreigner can as far as spreading the gospel. And the gospel can spread. If you were to look at the book of Acts, I think it's chapter 16. I'm not going to look it up right now. But when Paul is in Ephesus, the statement is made by Luke that the gospel was preached throughout the whole province of Asia. Now you need to remember, they didn't have TV and radio and mass publications and all that stuff. The only way that could have been done was that Paul was preaching in Ephesus, which was the provincial capital, and people were hearing the gospel there and then going back to their communities in other parts of the province and spreading the word. And ultimately, that's what we want to accomplish everywhere, here in the United States as well as overseas. And as the video pointed out, there is a much greater need than just leading people to the Lord. You need to disciple them. Now, many times you've probably heard missionaries talk about preach from the Great Commission, the last few verses of chapter of Matthew and the other Gospels. And if you ever think about it, in that passage of the Great Commission that God gave to the disciples, it never says anything about leading people to the Lord. That is sort of taken as an assumption of something that we should want to be doing normally. What he is encouraging his disciples to do is to disciple them. so that they become like they are. And if you look at 2 Timothy, when Paul was speaking, chapter 2, when Paul, which was the last book that he wrote, when he was writing to Timothy, he reminds Timothy of the importance of taking the message that Timothy had heard from him, teaching it to another group of people, and teaching them in a way that they in turn would be able to repeat it to the next group. And that's how the gospel has come to us today. The people have done that through many generations. But as you teach people, you need to give them materials to help them to teach. It is true that the main thing that you need is the Bible. Now, the Spanish has had the privilege of having a good Spanish Bible since the 1500s. It's actually a few years older than the King James Version is in English. So that is not an issue in the Spanish language. It is in quite a few other languages in the world. But still, it helps a great deal to have good books to help you. When a missionary goes to the foreign field in the past, he would take his library with him to help him in the preparation of messages and Sunday school classes and teaching classes in the seminary. Well, when that missionary was able to establish a church, he would move on to another place, and a national pastor would take over that church, but that national pastor still had to preach every week. He had to teach, and he had to provide material for the teachers in the Sunday school. And that's where EBI has come in. We like to compare EBI and what we produce to tools. Tools are very important. If you work with wood, if you work with cars and other types of machinery, you know that the proper tool is very important. Now, you can get by with another tool and that might not be the one that designed. A big screwdriver can be very handy for chiseling, but it doesn't do a very neat job. A big screwdriver can be used for prying something, but you're liable to bend the tip of the screwdriver in the process. If you're working in the engine compartment of a car and you have the wrong sized wrench, what's going to happen? Anybody know by experience? Maybe not much. You might round off the corners on the nut, or you might slip and bust up your fingers on something because you weren't using the right tool. And having the right tool makes it easier. It does a better job, saves time. And that's what we're wanting to provide, is good Christian literature. Now, as the ministry has grown in Latin America, we started out by needing things like Sunday school material and basic discipleship material. But as the Christians are maturing and as they're training pastors and so forth, you need more advanced material. And that's one of the things that, yes, we still have Sunday school material, and we still have basic discipleship material, but we're trying to develop more and more material for the pastors, for the Bible institutes, for the seminaries. And if you were to look out there on the table, our newest book, which came out just a little over a month ago, is a systematic theology book that's about this thick. And that's by far the biggest book we've ever published. It's 980 some pages or something like that. The biggest one we'd ever done before was maybe like 170. And it's the English version was done by Dr. Roland McEwen, who was the president, and also the systematic theology teacher at Detroit Baptist Seminary in Michigan. And so now that is available, and we're developing other materials as well. A group of materials that we're working on at this time have to do with biblical counseling. everybody has problems. People have problems here in the United States, and many of the same types of problems that people have here, they have overseas. Why? Because we're all sinners. And the best place to go to find out what sin has to do with our lives is the Bible. And so with biblical counseling, there are a lot of issues that take place in family life, daily life, in the work environment, so forth, that the problems originate with sin and are addressed to a greater or lesser degree in the Bible. And so we're working on a series of books right now at the printer. It might be coming back from the printer this week. I'm not sure exactly. Since I've been gone, is a book on biblical counseling. It's about that thick. And we're going to do a bunch of pamphlets on individual topics that are 24 pages each. So those are some of the things that we're trying to work on. We get feedback from the missionaries. EBI is involved in some of the folks from the missions visiting these mission fields and putting on seminars as far as teacher training and interaction with, and getting the feedback of the type of things that they are using. And so we're working on a bunch of new projects, and we would appreciate your prayers on that. One of the problems that we have is that most of us are getting older. Well, all of us are getting older. Some of us are just a little bit further along. And we're looking for help in different areas. The world is changing. Not everything is done with black ink on white paper anymore. We're trying to get into some of the digital areas and the web page and social media to make contact with the people. It doesn't do any good to have the books sitting in the warehouse if people don't know that they exist. And so we're trying to get more and more, look for ways for people to learn that it's available and to make it available efficiently. There's another video I'm going to show you right now that explains some of the needs of the ministry there at EBI.
Over the past 50-plus years, the faithful preaching of the gospel by missionaries and national pastors alike has resulted in an explosion of growth in Central and South America. Today, there are 40 to 50 million evangelical believers. Thousands of churches have been started. Countless lives have been changed. This represents a great victory. But the task is not finished.
These believers desperately need doctrinally sound leadership and quality resources to win the next generation and disciple them. A new chapter of missions has begun in which missionaries and nationals partner together for growth and effectiveness. Pastors and lay leaders must have access to resources tailored for their work so that they can be adequately equipped to stay in the game, to minister with strength, enthusiasm, and skillfulness in the scriptures.
At Editorial Bautista Independiente, we are serious about the march into the future. By actively creating, printing, and distributing critical theological resources, church curricula, and other ministry helps, we are accelerating their growth and maturation.
If we can equip national pastors, if we can facilitate churches in the actual doing of ministry, they are much more effective than we are. After all, it's the people that they live with. It's their people living in their neighborhoods. It's their culture. It's their marketplace.
The printed page remains the greatest means to educate and inform the growing generation of leaders. And through literature development, efficient graphics and page layout, and wise distribution methods, EBI is strategically positioned to make these tools available throughout the Spanish world. Yet as we endeavor to serve a new generation of believers in Latin America, we need a new generation of staff and volunteers to make this goal possible.
The demographics in Latin America are changing. There are a higher percentage of young people, and we need a young team in order to reach them effectively.
Una iglesia local necesita de varones y varones que están creciendo en la palabra de Dios. Si los varones no crecen en la palabra de Dios, la iglesia va a ser débil.
La doctrina es importante. Yo soy una descendencia de lo que ha salido por una mala doctrina. Nosotros sufrimos de eso y nosotros tenemos pánico ya. Pánico porque salimos de una doctrina donde no nos llevó bien.
So what does this new chapter of missions work to the Spanish world look like? How can I get involved?
EBI is looking for individuals amidst a variety of professional disciplines to serve as missionary staff and volunteers. This is a forward-thinking ministry requiring expertise in areas of information technology, website management, curriculum development, theological writing and editing, translation work, distribution, and field representation. This combination of talent and experience will help to fuel the effort of gospel proclamation and the discipling of believers into committed followers of Christ. We are Editorial Bautista Independiente, reaching lives, strengthening the church, and we invite you to join us in a new chapter of missions.
One of the areas that EBI has been working on for the last several years is trying to develop distributors in individual countries. In the past, when we first went to EBI almost 28 years ago, almost everything was sent out in small boxes and padded envelopes and so forth. And it was relatively inexpensive at that time because the post office had what was called boat rate. The package might take 3 months to arrive, but it was relatively inexpensive. But then just a few years ago, the post office went strictly to airmail. And it got much more expensive. I'm not sure the exact figure right now, but the last time I looked, book mail to a foreign country was about $1.10 a pound, except that for the first 11 pounds, they charged you like it was 11 pounds, even if it was only 1 pound. And then once it went past that 11-pound limit, then they started tacking on the extra $1.10. It's a little higher than that right now, but I'm not sure what. But if you've ever checked it out, books add up real quickly in weight. And then besides that are the problems that anybody in one of these foreign countries, they would have to pay us in dollars. And so they would have to find a source for dollars in their country. Often when the package would arrive, they would have to go to the post office or down to the customs office to get the package out of customs. So that was could be a day's work just there, doing paperwork to get it. And so what we're trying to get is more sources in the country that will order large quantities. And that then the national people can come, pay for it with their local currency. They don't have to worry about going to customs and so forth. And they could get it relatively inexpensive. And these big shipments are much cheaper. We have a distributor in Honduras. And I'm not sure what a recent order has cost because I'm not involved in that, but I know that some time ago they ordered a shipment of several hundred books, and we shipped them all to Miami, and they put them, and since it was a large shipment, they were put on an airplane and they got them for $50 in Honduras, and you can't beat that. except unless you were in Peru. And the Peruvians, for quite a few years, were able to work with a Christian organization that a couple times a year would get a container, a shipping container. And there was always extra room in the shipping container. And so they said, well, yeah, just have the books sent to wherever the container is being assembled, and we'll put the boxes on the container, and it's free. I mean, there's no extra cost for it. And that would arrive in Peru like that. And so it has helped a great deal. But there's still a lot of places that don't have distributors. My personal worry is, I think about it as the Dominican Republic where we were. They don't have a distributor down there yet. There's people that are interested, but there are also people that are involved in other ways in the ministry, and they just don't have a lot of extra time. Some of the distributors that we have are nationals that just consider it a ministry, and they do it along with whatever secular job that they have to sustain their family. Others are being handled by missionaries. There's a few of them that are handled by established bookstores, but yet there's a great deal more that could be done to make it easier and cheaper. So I wish you would pray about that, that they would be able to get access. There are some very large Christian organizations that have bookstores all over Latin America. And to them, EBI is a relatively small fish in the pond. And so we're working on ways to make access to them, to their distribution system, so that they would be able to get the books and make them available in Latin America. So that's one of the things that you could pray about. As the last video explained, there's new areas to the ministry. Quite often we're asked about using digital versions of the books. It's relatively easy for us to use, to make material available digitally for the books that we produce and ourselves, that we don't have contracts with other people. For instance, our Sunday school material. The Sunday school material, usually folks in Latin America, if a teacher is teaching a class, he would like to have a book. But there's usually a lot of other things, maps, charts, student leaflets, and things like that we have printed in the past. And so we're gradually switching over as those are used up and providing just a CD that goes in the teacher's book, and it's all sold together, and then they can reproduce it there locally. One thing you'll find in Latin America, just about in every other street corner, there's a drugstore or some little business that will have a copier there where you can copy things or print things out from the computer. So it'd be relatively easy for them. So that we're able to switch over. Another area of products that we have is what we call our TEE books, which are program textbooks designed for Bible Institute, basic training. And they're workbooks, and they're usually about 1/2 inch thick, 8.5 by 11. You have a class of 20 people, you're talking about a stack that big, and you're talking $30, $40 just to ship it. And then what usually happens is the professor will call from some country and says, well, the books arrived, and I just found out there's going to be 4 more students in the class that starts next Monday. And what we've told them now is, okay, you can photocopy the first few lessons until the 4 extra books arrive. Well, even that gets expensive. So what we've done is make it available as a PDF. A Bible Institute can purchase the PDF for a higher price, and it's their property. they can reproduce it for however many students they happen to have show up. That we can do. The problem comes with some of the books that are translated from other organizations. When we finished the Warren Wiersbe's B series, they're the commentaries on the New Testament, we wanted to make those available as digital books so they could be read on a Kindle, for instance. And so we worked on that, and then we realized that the American company that has the copyright that we work with to get the permission, they said that if we made it any digital books, they had to be controlled by what is called digital rights management. And basically that's a whole computer stuff, a special computer with special hardware that adds encoding to the book. When somebody buys it, it allows them to read it, but it doesn't allow them to reproduce it. Well, that whole business is very complicated and very expensive, and we decided at the present time we weren't going to pursue that. But that's sort of some of the problems that come up. There's a whole argument back and forth. Some publishers say, oh, you have to have digital rights management on any electronic book, so people don't copy it. And that is a danger. Hopefully, when you're working with Christians, Christians don't do that, although we have heard sometimes that they do. But the other side of the argument, just go ahead and sell it and don't worry about it. A lot of publishers are going that way as well, but as long as we're have a contract with the English publisher, our hands are sort of tied on that. But we are looking for ways to make this stuff available easier, so they don't have to pay shipping. They can just connect to the internet. The internet and electronics is getting much more common in Latin America. In fact, in many of the Latin American countries, in some respects, they are further ahead than we are here in the United States. In many of the countries, the telephone system is very bad. And so a lot of people, instead of paying all the money to get a telephone line run to their house, they've gone straight to cell phones. They never had a landline to begin with. And so some places, everybody's running around with an iPad or an iPhone or a Samsung or some fancy telephone. And it would be nice to make this stuff easily available in that format. So there's a lot of things that are going on. There's a lot of need. But there's a lot of details that are involved in the whole process to try to make it as efficient as possible, to provide the material that's possible. And we really, really appreciate your prayers that you would remember in just the translation, publication, editing, and the shipping process, and even after the things are shipped, that they would arrive in one piece. Sometimes they never show up. Sometimes all sorts of weird things happen. Just one quick example before I open it up for questions. A couple of years ago, we had shipped a box of books to a pastor in Mexico. And a few weeks later, the post office brought that box back to us. And usually when that happens, there'll be something on the box that'll say, that address no longer valid, or that person has moved, or whatever. Well, this time there was no markings on it, and so we thought, well, we're going to have to call this guy and tell him that his box came back and find out what the deal is. Well, he happened to call before we called him, and he'd gone down to the post office to find out, where his box was at, because sometimes these will arrive and they'll just sit in the post office. Well, the postmaster very apologetically told him that he did some investigation. The box had arrived. It had been downstairs in the post office, and one of the employees didn't want to carry this heavy box upstairs, so he just returned it. And the postmaster was very apologetic, and he says, you know, I could fire that guy for that type of thing. But, you know, the pastor wasn't really interested in getting the guy fired, and he was talking to him, and the postmaster asked him, well, what do you do, you know, and what type of stuff were you ordering? And so he told him that he was a pastor of the Baptist church there, and he was able to witness to him, and the postmaster, as far as I know, never accepted Christ as a Savior at that time, but he was very, very interested, impressed by the pastor. And he said, well, you call him up and you tell him to send that box back, and I will personally watch for it, and I'll give you a call when that box arrives. Well, a few weeks later, the box arrived again. He called the pastor. The pastor came and was standing in line to pick up the box. And while he was standing in line, there was a young couple standing behind him, and he got to talking to them. And they had just moved to town. Well, to make a long story short, they started coming to church because of that contact, because he was standing in line looking for his box. So even when bad things happen, God has a way of working things out to his honor and his glory. And so we never know exactly why some of the things do happen. Occasionally we have the privilege of hearing how it works out. I could stand up here the rest of the morning and talk about EBI and what we do and Latin America and so forth, and still might not answer the questions you have. So I'll give you an opportunity to ask questions now at this time about mission work in general, Latin America, translation, whatever. Yes, ma'am. My main ministry is to get the books ready to print. We usually get together, 3 or 4 of us as a group, and decide on what we're interested in printing. And then it gets the approval of the whole group once we've got some ideas. And then it's my job to get it ready. Usually the first step is to have somebody read through the English and try to spot idioms, figures of speech, that if you were to translate them into another language would make no sense at all. And to also change some of the illustrations. Believe it or not, most of the world doesn't care or isn't interested in American football, even if it is Nebraska. They're more interested in soccer. So if you give them an American football illustration, it means nothing to them. And so there's things like that. And then you send it off to the translator. It comes back from the translator, and I'll do some preliminary editing, send it to another proofreader. Usually when it comes back from that proofreader, I format it, lay it out on the computer in the way that it's going to appear in the book, give it to another person to proofread. Even though the computer program does a pretty good job with catching misspellings and hyphenation issues, it's not perfect. And so we'll read through it again. And then usually about that time it's ready to go to Daryl Jinks, and he's responsible for getting it printed and packaged and ready for sale. And Sheila helps in the accounting department in what's called accounts receivable. That's all the money that comes in, checks and so forth, getting it applied in the computer to the correct customer and making sure that everything balances. So that's our main responsibility. I'm also responsible for making sure that the computers are running, which sometimes it can go several days or even weeks without any big issue, and then sometimes the roof caves in, and then we got problems for a while. Any other questions? How many employees? Okay, let me count them up here in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's basically 12 of us there. We're not always all there at the same time. There's some of the families that the husband and wife both come in, at least part-time, like Sheila and I. Others, it's just one person in the family. The business manager, for instance, his wife has a lot of health issues, and they also have some children still at home, so she doesn't come in. One of the other older gentlemen, his wife has a lot of health issues, and she never comes in. But there's basically 12 of us there. Well, no, actually, I just thought of another one, 13. Our director's wife, she comes in 3 times a week as well. I saw a hand over here as well. Yes. Right now, the vast majority of printing is done here in the United States. We did do some Wiersbe books in large quantities. In cooperation with another organization that wanted to buy them from us. They were done over in India. But most everything's done here in the United States. There's been some talk, some consideration of doing it overseas in some of these individual countries. But then you have issues of quality control and trying to make the books, look the same as what we have here. And it has some advantages, but it has some big disadvantages as well. Yes, sir. Yeah. This fall we will have been there 28 years. Any other questions? Yes? Before that, we spent 8 years in the Dominican Republic as missionaries, and that's really where we got the interest in the literature. Working as pastoring a church, I soon began to realize the lack of literature that there was, and teaching in the Bible Institute, there finding out the lack of literature there was. When we left the Dominican Republic in 1990 to come here, the Bible Institute had been given money to buy books for the library, and we still had, I think we'd been given $5,000, and there was still $1,500 to $2,000 left. And we had 2 bookshelves, 6 foot high and 3 foot wide, and they weren't quite full. And we bought everything that was worth buying in Spanish at that particular time. Now that's been 28 years ago, and there's a lot more now. But it's an illustration of, really how much. I'm sure the pastor has a bigger library than that right here. And that's what this Bible Institute had. That's just an illustration of the lack. And all of that got me interested. When we moved to the capital to work full time in the Bible Institute, we were attending one of the Dominican churches that was already established, had a Spanish pastor. And I said to him, well, I'm here. What would you like me to do to help you? And he said, well, let me think about it. And he came back to me the next week and he says, well, instead of doing something for us, why don't you do something for all the churches? And I said, what do you have in mind? And he said, well, why don't you print a little Christian newspaper? So I thought about that's interesting. So I started printing every 6 weeks a little Christian newspaper with a couple, 3 articles and news about events in the different churches and some activities for the children and so forth, and did that every 6 weeks for the next 3.5 years that we were there. And so that got me interested as well. And then in 1990, we were asked by EBI if we were interested in coming there and working full time. I'd been a little bit of a thorn in the flesh to them because I was constantly prodding them. And as some of them said, they decided to have me under their noses so they could keep an eye on me. But yeah, so we came to EBI and started working 1990. Yes, sir. They're getting more and more. For instance, Strong's Exhaustive Concordance has been available now for, I'd just guess, 8 years, something like that. There's not a whole lot of, when it comes to grammar books. There's some very basic ones. For theology books, there have been some theology books tending more towards the basic. And as I'll explain in the morning service, they're not always the best either. And you know, a lot of books, if you've been around a Bible college or a seminary, and working with books, even in English, you'll find out that there are very, very few books that you would agree with 100%. But you begin to learn that, you know, you take the good and realize, okay, on this point he's a little, you know, something's a little fishy about this or that. And one of the issues that we work with in Latin America is that sometimes they're not very discerning. If it's in print, they swallow it hook, line, and sinker because it's right. And it's not always right. And so that's why we really want to get good books as much as possible available. But there's more and more. And one of the issues is that most of your other Spanish publishers are doing it as a business. And we do it as a business, but also a ministry. If we lose money on it, well, you know, God provides the money and so forth. But if they produce, even if they produce a book, and it's a good book, if they don't sell enough copies of it, they would tend to say, well, let it go out of print. And so there's been good books in the past that are no longer available in Spanish because they look at it just strictly financial. And so that just sort of aggravates the situation as well. Any other questions? If not, well, we have out there in the foyer, there's a table with some samples of some of the books on it. And we'll be around between Sunday school and church and after church. So if you have any other questions, feel free to come to us at that time. Pastor?